mosquitoes and oil. Hey guys, tonight we're heading into a world that's hot, sticky, and absolutely buzzing, literally. Picture this, you're in ancient Egypt, somewhere near Thebes. The air hangs thick like syrup, clinging to your arms. Your sandals make this quiet squelch as you walk along the stone corridor, and somewhere close by, bzzzzz, a mosquito is lining you up like it's got sniper training and a vendetta. So, why are we here? Because the pharaoh can't sleep. And that, oddly enough, might just change the future of diplomatic relations in the ancient world. You're about to find out why an itchy night in one royal bedroom can shake alliances, trade deals, and possibly lead to war over mosquito bites. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from Boise, Bangkok, or somewhere in between, let me know your time and place in the comments. I'm curious who's drifting off from where. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle through a stone hallway lit by flickering torchlight. The scent of scorched herbs and tree resin clings to the heat like a second skin. But what hits you first, before the scent, before the sweat, is the sound: mosquitoes. They buzz like a badly tuned symphony, funded, unfortunately, by the royal treasury. And the bad news? They love you. Tonight you've been allowed to observe the royal bedchamber, a space typically guarded tighter than the kingdom's treasure vaults. You're not here to steal gold or decode ancient prophecies. No, you're just trailing behind a young woman carrying a ceramic jar of thick brown oil. In her hands is a blend of myrrh resin, smoky tree sap, and something suspiciously lardy, probably animal fat. She kneels beside the pharaoh, lying sleepless on a massive linen-draped bed, and starts applying the concoction to his skin. The pharaoh stirs. He's been up and down 5 times already tonight, and every buzz, every itch, is another dagger in the side of international stability. Because here's the thing, to the ancient Egyptians, mosquitoes weren't just pests, they were omens. They signaled disease, divine displeasure, and unclean spiritual energy. And if the pharaoh isn't well rested, tomorrow's meeting with envoys from the Levant might go very, very wrong. In another wing of the palace, a council of physicians is deep in a crisis meeting. Not about a plague or a war. No, about incense. Specifically, which blend of smoke best keeps mosquitoes away from the pharaoh's bedside. The chief physician, his beard curled like a pastry, has suggested a mix of crushed orange peel, sticky resin, and a type of dried dung. Romantic? Not so much. Effective? Debatable. But politically strategic? Absolutely. Why? Because this particular incense is imported from Punt, a region far south, near the Horn of Africa. Maintaining supply means maintaining diplomacy, trade routes, gift exchanges, even arranged marriages. That's right. Defeating mosquitoes might require marrying off a princess. You catch a whiff of the incense, sweet, sharp, with a sting in the throat. You've smelled it before, in temples. That's no coincidence. If the pharaoh sleeps well, it's not just a personal victory, it's a sign that the gods are pleased. A sleepless pharaoh hints at divine unease, and that's a PR nightmare. You glance around the room and notice something strange: the murals. They're not just pretty pictures. Each one includes a small insect, bees, flies, even the unmistakable thin-winged mosquito. Tiny, almost hidden, but present like little warnings. You lean in, press your hand lightly on the wall, and spot a tiny line of hieroglyphs just below one mosquito's wings. When the pharaoh sleeps, the kingdom rests. Not a bedtime proverb. A political slogan. Historians still debate whether sleep was considered a sacred ritual in Egyptian royal protocol, but more and more evidence suggests it was exactly that. Dreams were interpreted by court priests. Nightmares were treated like coded messages. A peaceful night's rest could greenlight a treaty. A bad dream might postpone a declaration of war. You sit on a cool stone bench near the doorway, letting the chill of the floor soak through your linen robe. A servant walks by with a silver dish full of crushed myrrh resin. You spot a red welt on his neck. He didn't escape the mosquito swarm either. And remember, this is the most secure room in Egypt. 4 layers of curtains, 2 shifts of guards, walls so thick you could shout and no one would hear. And still, one rogue mosquito can unravel the next day's diplomacy like a loose thread on royal robes. It's like that crocodile dung sunscreen they use, yes, really. Because everything that touches the pharaoh's body must be carefully curated. Why? Because it influences global strategy. A distant drumbeat echoes through the palace, a signal that dawn is near. But the pharaoh is still awake. He rolls onto his side, groans, rubs his temples. The advisors murmur suggestions. Someone offers to try a different incense, sandalwood from across the Red Sea. But the reserves are low. To get more, Egypt will have to sweeten trade agreements. Or make military concessions. Or both. All this, because of one mosquito. You rise to leave, slipping quietly back into the corridor. The myrrh scent clings to your skin. Behind you, a curtain shifts, just slightly. Breeze? Or a mosquito making its escape? You don't scratch your cheek. You don't even blink. You've seen enough to know, in this bedroom, even the tiniest creature can cause an empire to sweat. And this night is far from over. The pharaoh's bedroom holds many secrets still. The crocodile fat sunscreen. You step back into the royal chambers just as the sky outside the high windows shifts from black to a soft violet, Egypt's version of a warning shot that the sun is coming. And when the sun comes, it does not come politely. Already, you can feel the heat creeping back into the stones beneath your feet. It's going to be another scorcher, the kind that turns statues into furnaces and linen into regret. But in here, in the pharaoh's private suite, preparations are already underway. Not for breakfast. Not for ceremonies. No, what matters first is the pharaoh's skin. You watch as 2 attendants enter the room carrying bowls of a thick, greenish paste. You think it might be clay, or some kind of herbal concoction. Nope. It's crocodile fat. Yep. Crocodile fat mixed with natron salt and burnt date pits. The finest ancient sunscreen money can buy. You take a cautious step closer. The smell is special. Like a mix of wet dog, pickled olives, and old campfire. One of the attendants dips their fingers into the paste and begins rubbing it across the pharaoh's arms and shoulders, careful not to tug the linen too much. Another works the legs, massaging the mixture into every sun-exposed inch. Pharaoh doesn't even blink. This is routine. This is power. Because in ancient Egypt, to stay pale and unburnt wasn't just about comfort, it was about image. It was about control. You find a spot against the wall where the scent is less overwhelming and let your eyes wander. A papyrus scroll has been left open on the floor nearby. You lean down slightly, just enough to make out the faded ink. It's not a prayer. It's a shipping manifest. A detailed record of clay pots, oils, and crocodile tallow shipped from the south, from Nubia. The quantities are staggering. 20 amphorae here, 30 jars there. Enough to lather a small village. And suddenly it clicks. This isn't just about skincare. It's about trade. Pharaoh's sunscreen is a foreign policy tool. The crocodiles come from the Nile's southern reaches, where Egypt's influence is strongest but always at risk. Procuring fat from those beasts requires local cooperation, which means treaties, tribute, and in some cases troops. Your skin may burn, but Pharaoh's skin? It cannot afford to. You start to piece together the pattern. Every morning, the Pharaoh's body becomes a canvas, and everything applied to it, every oil, balm, and powder, is sourced through a web of diplomacy. That frankincense? A gift from Arabia. The almond oil? Imported via Phoenician merchants. The crushed turquoise around the eyes? From mines halfway to the Sinai. And the crocodile fat? That's the most sensitive of all. The Nubian tribes who control the riverbanks don't give up crocodiles easily. They demand protection, marriages, tax breaks. They want Egyptian gold, Egyptian wives, Egyptian respect. And if they don't get it, they stop supplying the fat. Pharaoh burns. And if Pharaoh burns, he cancels meetings. He gets grumpy. He delays royal appearances. And worst of all, he dreams badly. You glance toward the balcony, where the sun is just cresting the horizon. The stone threshold glows like a hot skillet. But the Pharaoh's skin remains untouched. He stands, half-clothed, gleaming with crocodile paste, as still as a statue. And you can't help but wonder, how many emissaries across the sea have had their meetings rescheduled because of sunburn? Some scholars suggest that Pharaoh Amenhotep III once postponed the reception of Hittite delegates for an entire week, not because of war, not because of famine, but because he had developed a blister from walking to his boat in daylight. And who's to blame? A lapse in sunscreen, a missed shipment, a diplomatic hiccup. Historians still argue about whether Amenhotep's sore-footed week truly led to the delay in the grain treaty, but the timeline makes it suspiciously believable. Back in the bedchamber, the attendants are now fanning the pharaoh as the final touches are applied, a dusting of powdered lapis lazuli across the neck, a swipe of resin at the temples. It's less like a spa and more like armor. He's not being pampered. He's being prepped for performance. You look around and notice the jars and bowls laid out on a long table. Each one has a mark, a falcon, a lotus, a reed, a sun disk. Not just decorative, these are symbols for regions, provinces, supply chains. One bowl marked with a lotus? That's from the delta. The one with the reed? That's from a tributary of the Nile Pharaoh River. Each morning skincare routine is also a report card. Who's in favor? Who's in rebellion? Who's delivering? And who's stalling? Because if one ingredient is missing, it's not just an inconvenience, it's a warning. And the pharaoh notices. Oh, he may not speak of it out loud, but his silence is louder than any threat. There's a sudden commotion outside. A hawk flying too close to the balcony sends 2 guards scrambling. The pharaoh doesn't flinch. He raises one hand, and the room goes still. He walks to the edge of the sunlight. Just close enough that it licks his toes. No burn. The crocodile fat holds. You hear a sigh of relief. Maybe from an attendant. Maybe from the Nubian ambassador 3 buildings over, who just kept his trade agreement safe for another day. Because that's the secret, isn't it? This entire morning routine, this oily, smelly, sacred ritual, it isn't vanity. It's a message. It says, "Look at me. I am untouched. The sun itself bows to me. And that, dear scribe, is why your king must send his ships. You take one last look at the scroll on the floor. There's a note scribbled in the margins. It's in rushed hand, different ink. It says, 3 jars delayed. Border unrest. Just 3 jars. But you can already feel the weight of that sentence. Somewhere down the Nile, a crocodile wasn't caught, or a guard refused passage, or a bride wasn't sent. And now, because of that, Pharaoh might miss his next morning lather. Or worse, he might have to use backup fat. From somewhere else. A diplomatic insult wrapped in a greasy paste. You step away from the wall and follow the shadowed corridor again, the scent of sunscreen sticking to your robe. In this palace, sunscreen is not just protection from the sun. It's protection from embarrassment, failure, and foreign whispers. It's strategy, packed in a pot, scooped by hand, and spread across the body of a man who must never, ever, get burned. Because the world burns easily enough. A pillow full of papyrus. You return to the royal bedchamber just as the heat settles in like an unwanted hug. The morning rituals have ended. The pharaoh is gone, off to the hall of offerings or maybe the garden of judgments, somewhere important, somewhere public. But here, in this thick silence, you're left with what's behind. You move closer to the grand sleeping dais, where the bed still bears the faint imprint of royal sleep. The linens are taut, carefully tucked, and smell faintly of lavender, salt, and old paper. You lift the edge of one of the many headrests, not quite pillows by modern standards, but contoured supports made from curved wood or carved alabaster. And underneath, there it is, padding. Thin, crinkly layers of something golden brown and fibrous. Papyrus. Yes. The very material used for recording divine law, royal decrees, and trade accounts, now stuffed beneath the head of the living God. You tilt your head. What kind of bedtime stories does a pharaoh sleep on? You pinch one piece gently. The ink has faded, but the markings remain. It's a scroll, cut and folded, once a document, now a pillow. You squint at the top line and your eyes widen. It's an early draft of a treaty, between Egypt and Mitanni. You're not sure whether to be impressed or deeply confused. But then you get it. This isn't recycling. This is symbolism. If Pharaoh's head rests on old treaties, then his dreams are cradled by politics. Every night, he literally lays his thoughts on the weight of past alliances. And when he wakes, perhaps some part of that ink lingers in his judgment. Some historians believe this was intentional. That certain scribes were instructed to soften old documents, not destroy them, just break them in, so they could be used in the sleeping quarters. Not as trash, but as quiet reminders. A bed is a battlefield in silk. As you kneel to read further, you catch sight of other scroll fragments inside the headrest. One has faint illustrations of grain sacks, probably a ledger of exports. Another, oddly, has diagrams of shipbuilding techniques. You smile. So Pharaoh dreams of naval superiority, too. But it gets stranger. One piece you fish from the edge isn't administrative at all. It's poetic. A hymn to the sun god Ra. There's a line. Even in the dark, the sun carves a path within the mind of kings. You let that sink in. No wonder Egypt ruled for millennia. Even their bedding is aspirational. You sit quietly beside the bed now, tracing the line of linen with your finger. You imagine it, a pharaoh, lying down after a long day of ceremonies and decisions, laying his head onto a silent chorus of treaties, tariffs, and tributes. No lullabies, just law. And that's when it dawns on you, this isn't just tradition. It's strategy. Because if the Pharaoh sleeps soundly, so does the nation. And how he sleeps? That's curated like a performance. It's also why the royal archivists were some of the most trusted officials. They weren't just librarians, they were dream designers. They chose which documents were destined for the bedroom, which narratives might slip into Pharaoh's mind between dusk and dawn. Some were edited, quietly, before they were tucked into the headrest. A sentence removed. A name added. A tone softened. Sleep propaganda, one might say. You reach for another fragment and freeze. It's fresher than the others. The ink still smells faintly metallic. It's written in a bold, assertive hand, probably the vizier's. Tomorrow's meeting with the Hittite envoy must include mention of the grain shortage. Soften the tone. Suggest we are open to suggestions but maintain superiority of Nile distribution. A draft of a conversation. Practiced in bed. Slept on. Possibly even dreamed into a firmer stance. Your jaw slackens. Imagine negotiating with someone who rehearsed their rebuttals by literally napping on them. That's like bringing a pillow to a debate, except the pillow is your opponent's entire economic policy. The bed creaks faintly as you lean closer. A breeze nudges the curtain, letting in a shaft of light that lands on a nearby side table. On it, a reed pen, a roll of blank papyrus, and a small stone inkwell. Even in his bedroom, Pharaoh might rise and write. Or perhaps not him. Maybe the royal scribe waits just outside, ready to jot down the Pharaoh's sleep-mumbled declarations. There's a rumor among the older scribes that during the reign of Thutmose IV, a treaty was drafted entirely from one of the Pharaoh's dreams. He awoke and declared, "Send silver to the Hittites, and they'll return it as peace." It worked. Temporarily. Historians still debate whether that dream ever happened, or if it was just a political maneuver wrapped in sleepy mystique. Either way, the ink dried. The silver sailed. And peace came, for a season. You lie down beside the bed, careful not to disturb the delicate frame. The stone floor is unforgiving, but you imagine what it must be like to close your eyes surrounded by incense, silence, and the low rustle of ancient paper under your head. You dream of markets, perhaps. Of cities with names too long to fit on scrolls. Of boats heavy with cedarwood and linen, of ambassadors arguing in the sun. You dream of maps. Because even now you realize, the Pharaoh doesn't dream of gold or gods. He dreams of borders. There's a knock on the door. Soft. Rhythmic. A young servant enters, head bowed, carrying a clean cloth and a new stack of softened papyrus. He moves like a shadow, swapping out the used bedding with mechanical precision. And as he leaves, you hear him whisper to himself, almost like a prayer, "Let the king sleep wisely." You wonder if he knows what he's just placed beneath the linen. A message? A threat? An idea? Maybe all three. You remain in the room, watching the light shift, the shadows retreat, the bed grows still again. Because here, even in rest, Pharaoh prepares for war. And peace. Curtains that whisper wars. The chamber smells different today. There's a new weight in the air, heavier than myrrh, denser than incense. Something thick with tension. You notice it the moment you step back inside the Pharaoh's bedroom. The sunlight is more golden than usual, bleeding through fabric that wasn't there yesterday. New curtains. They ripple gently in the breeze, just slightly, like they're breathing. But it's not the fabric itself that draws you in, it's the way the light filters through them. Like secrets shifting on silk. You move closer. These aren't ordinary drapes. They hang from the ceiling in long, billowing columns, creating private alcoves within the bedroom. You could hide 3 men behind one and never see their outlines. Each panel is hand-dyed, a deep blue-black at the top that fades into golden thread near the bottom. You reach out and brush one with your fingers. It hisses like a whisper. Not literally, of course. But something about it makes you shiver, like the air behind the curtain is somehow different from the room around it. Cooler. Quieter. Listening. You pause and consider the placement. The curtains are positioned just so, between the door and the bed, between the writing table and the window, between the bath and the ceremonial chair. Not decorative. Strategic. Someone wants to control the view. Who sees the Pharaoh? What he sees when he opens his eyes. What he doesn't see when he closes them. You step behind one panel, into the dim alcove it forms. The fabric muffles the sound around you. The servants' footsteps go soft, as if they're walking across a distant dream. You press your back against the wall and breathe. In here you're invisible. And that, apparently, is the point. The curtains, you realize, are part of a system. You recall the scrolls from the day before, the ones under the Pharaoh's head. Some mentioned zones of sleep. You'd assumed they were metaphorical. Now, standing inside one, you're not so sure. This isn't just a bedchamber. It's a war room. A silent theater where alliances are whispered rather than shouted. Where the position of a curtain could decide who gets to whisper, and who gets cut from the scene entirely. And you're not the only one who's noticed. From the far corner, a voice clears. A man in a robe of lapis and ivory steps forward. He carries a fan but uses it more like a pointer than a cooling tool. He doesn't look at you. He doesn't need to. His attention is on the drapes. You know, he murmurs. These were hung the night before we met the envoy from Hatti. You raise an eyebrow. Hatti, the Hittites. Egypt's greatest diplomatic headache for decades. They brought silk. We showed silk. He gestures to the cloth again. But ours carried messages. You glance up and realize. There's embroidery along the hems. Tiny symbols. No bigger than the head of a pin. You squint and begin to piece them together. A crocodile, a sun disk, a horned viper, a cluster of reeds. Not writing. Codes. The royal decor is a cipher. This particular panel, you learn, was hung behind the Pharaoh's bed that night, not in front. So the Hittite envoy would see it as he approached. The message stitched into it? A subtle reference to a past skirmish along the northern border, one Egypt claimed to have forgotten. A reminder draped in silk. That envoy didn't sleep well that night. And the treaty? Slightly more favorable than anyone expected. Some historians still debate whether the Hittites even noticed the embroidery, or whether it was just clever design. But the timing, as always, suggests intent. You move down the line of curtains now, running your fingers along each one. One bears threads of silver, unusual in Egypt, where gold is king. A nod to the trade agreements with Mycenae, perhaps? Another is faintly scented. Not incense, but something else. Cinnamon? That would have come from far-off lands, signaling reach, influence, power. You lean in closer and sniff. Yes. Cinnamon and cardamom. Spices that cost a small fortune. Spices used only when the Pharaoh wanted to send a specific kind of signal. We smell better than you. It's petty. It's brilliant. It's diplomacy through interior design. You return to the alcove and look out from behind the curtain toward the Pharaoh's bed. You imagine yourself as one of his advisors, stepping carefully into the room. You wouldn't speak right away. You'd take in the drapes first. Note the colors, the smells, the placements. Then, and only then, would you know what tone to strike. You think of how, just last month, a curtain with red edges was hung, only red in a sea of pale linen. That was the week tensions rose with the Nubians. The week Pharaoh refused to see the ambassadors and instead sent them gifts. Red, the color of blood, and apology. Coincidence? Doubtful. There's a sudden rustle, and you turn to see a young servant adjusting one of the ties. He's careful. Reverent. Like he's touching sacred scripture. You asked him, quietly, why he's so precise. He answers without looking at you. A wrinkle in the wrong place makes the wrong man confident. You let that hang in the air. Because in this room, even a fold might provoke a war. You sit down on a small bench in the corner, letting the curtain fall in front of you again. You think of all the envoys, all the generals, all the nobles who've stood in this room thinking they were in control, when in fact, they were being spoken to by velvet and dye and whispering fabric. Pharaoh may have said nothing, but the curtains did. Servants and sent politics. It's the middle of the day now, and the Pharaoh's bedroom is empty of royalty but full of purpose. The light has shifted, softer, almost syrupy, and it pools in golden puddles on the floor. But it's not the light that tells you something's happening. It's the smell. The entire room is humming with scent. Sweet, smoky, sharp, and heady all at once, like someone turned every perfume bottle in the kingdom upside down and let them argue about who's in charge. You follow the trail toward the central table, where the perfume steward, yes, that's a real title, carefully unrolls a linen cloth. On it are 20 glass vials, each one sealed with wax, each labeled in script so fine it might as well be embroidery. The steward doesn't notice you at first. He's in the zone, eyes half closed, tilting a vial this way and that like a jeweler inspecting sapphires. Then, with a soft grunt, he selects 3 and sets them aside. You step closer, and the scent hits you square in the face. Spikenard. Frankincense. And something sharp and lemony, maybe imported marjoram? You cough. He chuckles, not unkindly. You'll get used to it. Or you'll pass out. You ask him what he's doing. He doesn't look up. Choosing tonight's message. Wait, message? He taps the smallest vial with one finger. This one says, "We remember your betrayal." Then the medium-sized one. This one says, "We're watching your grain ships." And the last. This one? This one says, "We may forgive you, if you bow first." You blink. He smiles. Scent, he says, is the first thing anyone notices. And the last thing they forget. You glance around. The room smells different depending on where you stand. Near the bed, warm, resinous, calming. By the door, sharp, crisp, almost medicinal. At the writing desk, cool and powdery, like crushed lotus. None of this is accidental. The Pharaoh, apparently, is a connoisseur of scent diplomacy. Each region of Egypt, and many beyond it, has a signature fragrance. The Levant? Cedar and balsam. Nubia? Myrrh and dried orchid. The Hittites? They favor something mustier, more earthen. When dignitaries arrive, the chamber is prepared to match, or confront, them. If Pharaoh wants to intimidate, the perfume changes. If he wants to charm, it changes again. There's even a scroll somewhere, probably buried beneath a pile of rose petals, that details central strategy for negotiation, penned by a long-dead advisor who apparently thought perfume could end wars. Honestly, he might have been right. The steward lifts the vial of spikenard and unseals it with a pop. Instantly, the air thickens with sweetness, like warm honey left too long in the sun. He dips a reed into it, and walks slowly toward the bed, dotting the linen canopy with scent. That, he says, is for memory. You ask, memory of what? He shrugs. Whatever the Pharaoh wants them to remember. You look at the bed, perfectly made, draped in gold-edged cloth, and now scented like a field of dying flowers. Somehow it works. Somehow, it tells a story. You ask him if Pharaoh chooses these himself. He smirks. Sometimes. Other times he lets the room speak. There's a moment of stillness as he caps the vials again. Then another servant enters, young, barefoot, carrying 2 small jars. She places them beside the others. The steward uncaps one, sniffs, and recoils. You do too. What is that? He answers with one word. Garlic. You gag. It's for tonight, he says. You wait. The ambassador from Babylon has a sensitive nose. We remind him of home. You want to laugh. But also, you sort of admire it. That's not diplomacy. That's warfare. Historians still debate whether Egypt's scent-based signaling was deliberate, or just overly luxurious habit. Some say it was coincidence that certain smells were used during high-stakes meetings. Others claim every drop was intentional, part of a wider psychological strategy. But if you were standing here, breathing this fragrant fog, you'd know better. This is no accident. This is a silent language. And everyone in this palace speaks it, whether they admit it or not. You walk toward the small wooden shelf near the window, where older bottles rest, dusty and forgotten. You lift one and twist the seal open. The scent is faint now, but familiar, violets and dust and something bitter underneath. A label curls at the edge. You flatten it. It reads, used during talks with the Sea Peoples. 3rd year of the Hungry Moon. You stare at the bottle. The Sea Peoples, a vague and dangerous coalition that nearly toppled half the known world. And someone thought this was the scent to use when they came knocking? Either bold or desperate. Or both. Behind you, the steward speaks again. His voice is low now, almost reverent. There are some scents we don't use anymore, he says. Ones that carry bad memories. He doesn't elaborate. But you know what he means. Perfume, in this place, is not just smell. It's story. It's consequence. Sometimes even curse. He puts the garlic oil away, sealing it tightly. The message has been chosen. And you now know a secret most never will. The Pharaoh's first words aren't spoken. They're smelled. The temperature conspiracy. You feel it before you notice it. The air in the Pharaoh's bedroom is unnaturally cool. Not breezy, not drafty, just cooler than it should be. Especially for Egypt. Especially for noon. Especially when just stepping outside would feel like being slow-roasted in a brick oven by Ra himself. You pause in the doorway. The change is subtle, like someone whispered ice into the walls. No fans are spinning, no servants are fanning. And yet, the air seems to cling a few degrees below the rest of the palace. You take a cautious step inside. It's deliberate. Of course it is. Because in this palace, nothing is accidental. Not even the temperature. You wander past the bed and toward the western alcove, where a wide slab of polished limestone lines the wall. There, in the shadows, sits an enormous ceramic jar. Its sides are sweating, beaded with condensation. Inside? Evaporated water. Cooling water. The kind used to drop a room's heat by just enough to matter. By just enough to make sure the pharaoh's mood stays sweet and his tunic doesn't stick uncomfortably in unfortunate places. You place a hand near the jar and feel the cool exhale of vapor rising. Then you see another, tucked in the corner. And another, near the opposite curtain. These jars aren't for comfort. They're for control. Back in the central chamber, a servant steps carefully across the mosaic floor with a clay tablet in hand. He kneels by the incense burner, shifts it half an inch, and checks something written on the tablet. He looks up. Sees you watching. "What are you measuring?" you ask. He lifts the tablet slightly. "Flow." You blink. "Flow of what?" He smiles. "Everything." And now, as your eyes adjust, you notice the markers, etched into the walls at ankle height, barely visible. Slits in the floor. Vents in the plaster. A design disguised as decoration. The bedroom is engineered. Somewhere deep in the royal archives, probably locked behind a door guarded by a leopard with trust issues, is a set of blueprints. Not of a temple, not of a warship, but of this room. This single room. And those blueprints don't just show measurements. They show airflow, light paths, thermal currents, moisture maps. The pharaoh's bedroom is a living machine. And the thing it's built to manipulate? His body. His perception. His decisions. You sit near the bed, suddenly aware of the air on your skin. It shifts almost imperceptibly. A cool breath near your feet. A dry one along your arm. The ceiling is domed not for beauty, but to guide the rising heat away from where the pharaoh sleeps. And in the heat of a political decision, literally and figuratively, these few degrees of comfort could shift everything. There's an old saying. A tired pharaoh delays. A hot pharaoh punishes. You begin to understand. In fact, legend holds that the infamous failed treaty with Assyria, where Egypt agreed to grain exports only to be swindled, was negotiated on a day when the cooling jars cracked from overuse. The room was stifling. The pharaoh, irritable. The meeting lasted 13 minutes. The agreement was sealed. And Egypt lost 6 months of wheat. Historians still debate whether that agreement was a result of impatience, poor negotiation, or simply heat exhaustion. But records from the chamber's stewards that day mention a broken airflow vent and a noticeable increase in royal perspiration. Coincidence? You don't think so. You rise, walking to a set of narrow shutters behind the main curtain. You slide one open. Outside, the sun is brutal, searing the sand white. But in here? The light touches only stone. No beams fall on the pharaoh's bed. Not directly. The whole room is aligned, season by season, to ensure the royal skin is kissed only by reflected light, never raw sun. Its geometry. Its intention. Its mood management disguised as architecture. You pause by a thick papyrus scroll left open on a side table. The script is meticulous, and a heading catches your eye: Night Draft Calculations, 5th month of Shema. It's a log. The chamber steward's record wind direction. Wall temperature. The angle of incense smoke. And at the bottom, a note. Do not lower cooling pots before the ambassador from Tyre enters. Pharaoh must appear resilient. You stare at that line. Resilient. Because even the illusion of warmth, or the endurance of it, is political. You begin to see the deeper conspiracy. The room is not designed just to soothe Pharaoh's skin. It's designed to stir reactions. If the air is too cold during a negotiation, the opposing envoy might feel unwelcome. If it's too warm, they might assume weakness. If it's perfectly balanced, they may never notice. But their heart rate slows, their defenses drop. They speak more openly. And the Pharaoh listens more clearly. A servant enters with a new jug of water, sliding it beside the others. She glances up and whispers a line you almost miss. Heat makes truth melt. You want to laugh. You want to write it down. But you already know someone else did. It's likely carved somewhere into the blueprint margins of this very room. You step back toward the entrance, and pause at the threshold. The moment your foot crosses the line, the temperature rises. Just slightly. Just enough to feel like leaving a dream. Behind you, the Pharaoh will sleep, cool, calm, cradled in a carefully designed cocoon of science, scent, and silence. And tomorrow, when he faces another diplomat, he'll be refreshed. And dangerous. Bedbugs and betrayal. There's a certain stillness in the Pharaoh's bedroom tonight. The kind of stillness that feels earned, like the room itself is holding its breath. The linens have been fluffed, the incense lit, the cooling jars replaced with fresh ones that still drip with dew. Every jar, every corner, every shadow is in its proper place. And yet, something is wrong. You don't notice it at first. Not in the grand display of order. Not in the golden canopy that hangs like a silent promise above the Pharaoh's bed. No, it starts smaller. Much smaller. It starts with an itch. A servant pauses as he smooths the foot of the bed. He scratches his wrist. Then again. Then pulls back the edge of the linen with a frown. You step closer. And that's when you see it, just for a second, a flicker of movement in the fold. A tiny, scuttling creature. Brown. Flat. Fast. A bedbug. And just like that, everything changes. The steward pales. Not again, he whispers. You blink. Again? He nods, his voice low and tight. This happened once before. During the visit from the Babylonians. The Babylonians. That was the week Pharaoh cut negotiations short after the second night. The envoys were confused, offended. A grain treaty was never finalized. The record states Pharaoh claimed illness of the mind, brought on by restless nights. But now you wonder, was it bedbugs? You kneel beside the servant as he lifts the mattress slightly. There, at the seam, tiny black specks. A sickly sweet smell, faint but there. He sighs. We fumigated last month, he mutters. We used cedar oil. Ground up date pits. Even incense from Punt. But they always come back. And here's the truly terrifying part. He looks at you and says, they know where to hide. You feel a phantom itch along your own arm. In this room, insects aren't just pests, they're policy risks. Because if the Pharaoh doesn't sleep, the empire doesn't breathe. And these creatures? These crumb-sized traitors? They threaten more than skin. They threaten strategy. The last time this happened, the Pharaoh awoke in a fury. 4 bites on his leg. 3 on his shoulder. And 1 on his temple. That was the day he refused to meet with the envoy from Cyprus. He declared, Any man who steps into my chamber while I itch is an enemy. Poetic. Dangerous. You imagine the consequences rippling outward. One diplomat offended. One shipment delayed. One city left hungry. All because a bedbug bit the wrong king at the wrong time. You step back as more servants file in. They bring brass bowls of oil and bundles of herbs. They're quick, coordinated. This is not their first infestation. One begins rubbing the legs of the bed with crushed garlic and resin. Another places trays of ash beneath the mattress. A third mutters a protective prayer to Bes, the dwarf god of sleep and pest control. Even the gods have been called. This is serious. You lean against the far wall, arms crossed, watching them scramble. And you start to wonder, what if it wasn't an accident? The idea comes like a shiver. Sabata. Planted bedbugs. Carried in by fabric. Slipped in with a servant's robe. Hidden inside a diplomatic gift. A perfumed sachet. A decorative cushion. A silk sleeve. The enemy doesn't always bring swords. Sometimes they bring itching. A hush falls over the room. One of the stewards holds up a small wooden box, found beneath the bed frame. Inside? Linen. And bedbugs. Dozens. Alive. It's not protocol to bring foreign linens into the royal chamber. Yet here it is, a guest offering, likely placed there by an unsuspecting servant. Or a very clever spy. You see the panic in the steward's eyes. This is more than an inconvenience. This is a breach. A violation of sanctum. A direct threat to the one thing Pharaoh needs most right now. Sleep. The question now is not how, but who. Who would risk diplomatic catastrophe to send a swarm of parasites? The steward mutters possibilities. The Assyrians? No. Too blunt. The Libyans? Maybe. The Hittites? Always suspicious. He pulls out a small tablet and begins noting the positions of the bites, the times of last fumigation, and yes, the dates of all incoming textile gifts. A pattern is forming. And it's not just about bugs anymore. You retreat toward the curtain, heart pounding with a ridiculous realization. This entire empire, this sprawling machine of gods and grain and gold, is balanced on the fragile skin of one man. And that skin is under siege by bugs. Tiny, undetectable, insidious bugs. You can see it now. A war not of blades but of itches. Where sleep is the prize, and paranoia is the enemy's best weapon. The room is quiet again. The servants have left. The linens have been replaced. The mattress scrubbed. Cedar and garlic hang in the air like a bitter promise. The Pharaoh will sleep here tonight. And tomorrow? He will meet with the emissary from Byblos. Or he won't. Depending on whether one last bug escaped the purge. You reach up to scratch your arm. Just once. Then you stop yourself. Because in this place, an itch might mean everything. Dreams delivered by dancers. You return to the Pharaoh's bedchamber just after nightfall. The torches burn low, casting long, golden shadows that flicker and ripple like water across the walls. Incense coils through the room like a slow, invisible snake, and the silence is thick, until it's broken by the softest rhythm. A bell. A single chime. Then another. And then movement. From behind the velvet curtains, a figure emerges, not a priest, not a steward, not a scribe. A dancer. She steps barefoot across the cool floor, ankles wrapped in linen, wrists looped with tiny bells. She carries nothing. Wears no jewels. Her body is her message. And her destination? The foot of the Pharaoh's bed. You flatten against the column nearest the doorway, trying not to breathe too loudly. Another dancer joins her, then another. 4 in total. They form a circle, not around the bed exactly, but around the space it occupies. They don't speak. They don't bow. They begin to move. Slowly. Gracefully. Like shadows that learn to dance. Their arms cut the air in sweeping, looping arcs. Their feet glide without a sound. Each step is deliberate, practiced, not just performance, but ritual. Their movements don't draw attention to themselves, they direct it. Focus it. Toward the Pharaoh's mind. He lies still, eyes closed, not yet asleep but drifting. And you begin to understand. These aren't entertainers. They're dream senders. According to certain obscure papyri, ones most historians dismiss as poetic nonsense, the royal dancers were part of a tradition known as Kana Sikit, the shaping of the sleep. It was believed that dreams, like speeches or prophecies, could be composed, if guided properly. And who better to guide a dream than someone who can move like water and rhythm and breath? Tonight you're watching it happen. One dancer raises her arms high, then lets them fall slowly, like grain spilling from a basket. Trade. Another sways like a reed in wind, trembling but unbroken. Diplomacy. A third circles the bed 3 times, pausing on the eastern side each time. Victory. You don't know the full language. But it doesn't matter. The Pharaoh does. There's a moment where time seems to hold its breath. And then, like the shifting of the Nile in moonlight, the dance changes. It sharpens. 2 dancers mirror each other, back to back, one reaching forward, the other pulling away. Conflict. Another sweeps across the room in silence, tracing a curve behind the bed. Intrigue. It's choreography as suggestion. Narrative as gesture. Not commands, never that. Just dreams. Planted like seeds. Historians still argue about this. Some say there's no proof pharaohs choreographed their dreams. Others say these dances were merely symbolic, like temple rituals meant to please the gods, not the subconscious. But others, the bold ones, suggest something stranger. That pharaohs believed dreams were a kind of prophecy. But not received prophecy. Directed prophecy. A collaboration between body, mind, and the dancers who dared to tiptoe through both. You shift slightly as the lead dancer stops, kneels, and presses her forehead gently to the floor. The other 3 follow suit. Then, as one, they rise. The room is utterly still again. Pharaoh doesn't open his eyes. But his breathing has changed, deeper, steadier. He is no longer drifting. He is dreaming. And that dream? Might just tip the scales of a kingdom tomorrow. You wait until the dancers exit, passing by you in a quiet line like a trail of smoke. You see no joy in their faces. No pride. Just solemnity. Focus. This was not a performance for applause. It was an assignment. One dancer, the youngest, glances at you as she passes. Just for a second. You see something in her eyes. Fear? No. Responsibility. As if she knows exactly what she just whispered into a sleeping god's mind. After they're gone, you sit on the edge of a stool near the foot of the bed. You watch the pharaoh sleep. His face is serene. His hands still. But behind those eyelids, something has taken root. Maybe it's an image of ships arriving with gold. Maybe it's a foreign face bending the knee. Or maybe, just maybe, It's the outline of a betrayal, unformed but heavy. You'll never know. But tomorrow? When the Pharaoh wakes? He'll act on it. And no one will know why. Except the dancers. Architects of the nap. You step into the Pharaoh's bedroom at mid-morning, expecting stillness. But today, there's the clang of bronze tools and the faint sound of chalk on stone. A pair of men in dyed linen tunics, definitely not servants, kneel by the far wall, whispering fiercely over a slab of limestone. One has a compass. The other? A blueprint. Yes. A blueprint. For a nap. You edge closer, careful not to disturb the soft drift of air circulating through the chamber. The older of the two men points to a line on the drawing, then gestures toward the ceiling. The younger scribbles something down. They're architects. Not of pyramids, not of tombs. Of dreams. Specifically, royal sleep structure. This is new to you. You've seen the dancers, the perfume stewards, even the paranoid linen handlers. But these two? These are dream engineers. The older one notices you watching. He nods, then taps the drawing. We're adjusting the ceiling curve, he says, almost apologetically. The echo along the northeast wall amplifies jackal cries after dark. You pause. You mean the real jackals? He nods again. Very distracting. Last week, his radiance woke twice. Said the noise made his teeth itch. You don't question the metaphor. You just lean in and see what else is being altered. Apparently, the Pharaoh's chamber is being tuned like an instrument. They explain the concept to you, more out of pride than necessity. The room is shaped to curve sound away from the sleeping dais. The dome captures and lifts ambient noise upward. The vents release stale heat but retain cooler air near the floor. Everything flows with a rhythm. Light filters through angled slats to imitate the golden hour, for as long as the Pharaoh wants it to. Even the stone beneath the mattress is adjusted monthly, adding or subtracting millimeters of elevation for better spinal alignment. This is not superstition. It's strategy. You must understand, the older architect says. Pharaoh's nap is not merely rest. It is renewal. It is calibration. Like winding a sundial. If his posture is off, his decisions will follow. You're not sure whether to nod or blink slowly. He continues. The mind listens to the body. The body listens to the room. And we design the room. You suddenly feel like you're standing in the inner coil of an ancient machine. One that hums so quietly you forget it's alive. There's a phrase carved just above the lintel of the room's inner arch, one you hadn't noticed before. It reads, "Let no sound cross this threshold but that which soothes." Not a poetic flourish. A commandment. A blueprint note. A prophecy. You follow them to the far corner, where a small alcove has been hollowed from the wall. Inside it, a row of curved stones line the floor like a miniature amphitheater. The dream shelf, the younger man says. You stare. The what? He explains. Each stone captures and reflects sound differently. At night, a single pebble placed among them can create an audible rhythm that lulls the Pharaoh into deeper sleep. They're tuned, he says, smiling faintly. Like a harp. You laugh, just a little. But it's not a joke. This is how serious it gets. You remember an entry in an old scroll, buried in the archive, a note from the reign of Seti I. It describes a minor rebellion that was halted because the Pharaoh received a clarifying vision in sleep the night before he was set to respond. Some claim it was divine intervention. Others? good architecture. Historians still debate whether this level of environmental manipulation had real impact. But you begin to suspect the truth is simpler. Whether it worked didn't matter. What mattered is that Pharaoh believed it did. And so did everyone around him. Which made it real enough to move armies. You walk back toward the bed, past a series of subtle ridges in the wall. They form a pattern, barely perceptible unless you run your hand across them. We call those the wind lines, the elder says. They slow down the airflow. Keep it from whispering. You glance at him. We tested dozens of carvings before finding the right pattern, he adds. Too many curves, and it makes a moaning noise. Too few, and it whistles. You don't even ask how they discovered that. You just stare at the wall, the bed, the ceiling, the room that sleeps better than you do. And suddenly you realize, this place is not just where the Pharaoh rests. It's where decisions are grown, cultivated, nurtured, cradled in silence and geometry and shadows that fall just so. It's not a bedchamber. It's a cradle for the future. The architects gather their tools, roll up the plans, and bow slightly before leaving. The younger one hesitates at the door and looks back at you. People think the Pharaoh rules with his voice, he says. He taps his own temple. But sometimes it's what he dreams that rules instead. Then he steps into the hallway, and you're alone again. Standing in a room that's silent by design. Poised. Breathing. Ready to shape the next empire. The bed with 6 languages. You enter the chamber just after dusk, expecting calm. But what you find is a puzzle. A single beam of moonlight slips through the upper slit window and lands directly across the Pharaoh's bed frame. Not the mattress. Not the sheets. The frame. Heavy. Wooden. Carved from imported cedar and polished until it glows like old honey. And along the side, where you might expect a decorative border or maybe a prayer? Writing. 6 different scripts. You kneel beside the frame and begin to trace them with your fingers. Not deep inscriptions, just shallow enough to be intimate, almost whispered into the wood. Hieroglyphs, yes. Of course. But also cuneiform, Phoenician, Anatolian hieroglyphs, a few lines of early Greek, and oddest of all, something that looks suspiciously like Old South Arabian. You blink. Recheck. No, you're not imagining it. The Pharaoh's bed literally speaks 6 languages. A scribe enters the room behind you, carrying a candle. He doesn't seem surprised to see you crouched by the bed like a curious raccoon. Instead, he kneels beside you, raises the candle, and says simply, "Diplomacy never sleeps." You smirk. But apparently it sleeps on everything. He chuckles. That too. Then he touches one of the phrases with his index finger, carefully, reverently. This line, he murmurs, was copied from a treaty with the Hittites. Word for word. You look closer. It reads, "Bound by bread, by blood, and by the will of both sons." You pause. That's not just poetic. That's legally binding language. In bed. Literally. Why 6? You ask. Because 7 would be too obvious, he replies, smiling. Then, more seriously, because these were the tongues of our rivals, our partners, our enemies, and our future allies. The idea is staggering. The Pharaoh doesn't just rest on cedar and linen, he rests on context. On language itself. This is not a bed. It's a treaty table with a mattress. You glance toward the headboard. more symbols. Smaller now, densely packed. Some are smudged from wear. One is cracked, split slightly where the wood has dried. You point. The scribe leans in, squints. That used to say grain, he says. Now it just says rain. You raise an eyebrow. Well, he shrugs. Some would call that a lucky slip. You both laugh. But you're already thinking, if the Pharaoh rolled over and read the word rain instead of grain, would he wake up thinking of weather or trade? Of drought or surplus? In this palace, that one letter might shift tomorrow's meeting agenda. Historians still debate whether these multilingual carvings were ever meant to be read, or if they were symbolic, a kind of sleeping banner, declaring Egypt's dominance through translation. Some claim the inscriptions were added during Amenhotep III's rule, when foreign marriages were common and diplomacy was a nightly affair. Others say they came later, after the treaties were broken, as a kind of reminder or warning. But one thing is certain, they weren't decorative. They were functional. They were memory. The scribe tells you how, years ago, a minor noble from Cyprus was shown the bed as a gesture of trust. He bowed deeply and kissed the section carved in his language. Then he asked, quietly, if he might lie on it. Pharaoh agreed. 3 months later, Egypt had exclusive access to Cypriot copper. Coincidence? You're starting to doubt coincidence even exists in this place. You ask the scribe who carved the letters. Different hands, he says. Different years. Some before this bed even came into the chamber. You ask why they weren't written on a scroll or a wall. He smiles. Because pharaohs don't just sleep. They absorb. You shiver, just a little. Because if that's true, then this bed has whispered secrets to generations. And every word etched here still vibrates, just under the surface. Waiting. You run your fingers over a section near the footboard. The script is unfamiliar, swirling, almost musical. The scribe identifies it Ugaritic. You ask what it says? He hesitates. Then, softly, do not forget the woman who watches while you sleep. You glance at him. That line, he says, was added during a royal marriage to a princess from the north. She couldn't speak Egyptian, but she could read this. You look back at the phrase. And suddenly, this bed doesn't just speak of treaties. It speaks of fear, love, power. The scribe stands, bows slightly, and begins to leave. But before he does, he turns and says, if you dream in many languages, you awaken with many answers. Then he disappears behind the curtain. You stay where you are. One hand on the bed frame. Listening. Because somewhere in the cedar, a sentence waits to be heard. And it just might be the next move in a game older than the wood itself. A fan for the foreign minister. You return to the Pharaoh's bedroom at the height of day, expecting quiet. Instead, you find rhythm. Whip whip. Whip whip. Not sharp. Not harsh. Just steady. A soft, feathered beat, like a bird flapping in slow motion, over and over again. You follow the sound to its source, a young servant seated on a small stool near the Pharaoh's bed, moving a massive ostrich feather fan back and forth with the precision of a metronome. Whip whip. You stand at the threshold, watching. At first, it looks mundane, another part of royal comfort. But then you notice the pattern. 3 long sweeps. 2 short. Pause. Repeat. You frown. That's not cooling. That's code. The servant doesn't look at you. Doesn't falter. He just keeps fanning, eyes forward, face calm. Whip whip. Whip whip. Whip. There it is again. You slip behind a column and observe the room more closely. Across from the servant, near the open window, sits a man in diplomatic robes. Fine ones. Heavy embroidery, dyed threads, foreign cut. You've seen his kind before, an envoy from Kadesh if you had to guess. He stares at the fan but says nothing. His hands are folded. His posture respectful. But his foot? It taps. Once, twice. In time. Not nervous. Listening. You edge closer to the linen divider that separates the royal dais from the receiving space. From here, you can see it all: the bed, the fan, the diplomat, the silence. The pharaoh lies with his eyes closed, unmoving. Whether asleep or pretending is unclear. Either way, this isn't a meeting. It's a performance. And the fan is the script. You've heard rumors, of course, that certain fanners were trained not only in rhythm and discretion, but in subtle signaling. That the motion of a feather could transmit entire phrases, intentions, warnings. That a shift in speed might say, "Deny the offer," while a full stop could mean, "Agree in part but delay." Historians still debate whether these accounts are fact or fantasy. But watching now, you're starting to believe. Because as the fan glides through its next series, the envoy lifts his eyes. He nods once, then looks away. No words have been spoken. No scribes have recorded a treaty. But something has just been agreed upon. You're sure of it. Later, when the envoy leaves, you follow. He moves briskly through the corridor, robe flaring slightly at the ankles. You trail at a distance. He turns a corner, pauses near a small basin, and dips his fingers into the water. You catch the faintest whisper. Same code as Memphis. He's not talking to you. He's talking to a second envoy, who steps out from the shadows like smoke. They exchange a glance, a nod, and vanish down the hallway. Back in the bedroom, the fan continues. A new diplomat has entered. This one older. From the east. The servant shifts his rhythm immediately, different tempo, different flow. It's like watching a musician change keys mid-song. Only this music guides politics. You sit now near the edge of the dais, observing the servant more closely. His arm never tires. His pace never wavers. And every once in a while, his eyes dart, not at the pharaoh, but at the curtain near the rear wall. And you realize, he's not sending the signal. He's relaying it. Someone stands behind that curtain, out of sight. Watching. Directing. You rise. Walk slowly toward the panel. Press your ear against the silk. Silence. Then, a quiet snap of fingers. The fan shifts. One long sweep. Two short. Then stillness. The servant lowers the fan. The diplomat bows. The meeting ends. You turn and whisper, half to yourself, half to the air. They didn't say a word. A voice answers, female, dry as sand. Words are loud. Fans are safe. You jump slightly. From the side chamber, a woman steps out, dressed not like a servant, but not quite royal. A high official. Eyes lined with kohl, mouth pursed into something between a smile and a warning. She walks to the fan bearer and replaces him with a nod. He bows and disappears. She sits. She lifts the fan. She begins to move it. And in doing so, she begins to speak. The pharaoh stirs but does not wake. He doesn't need to. Because even in sleep he listens. The fan is the tongue of the chamber. Soft. Private. Unrecorded. You think of how many decisions were made like this, without scrolls, without scribes, without sound. Just feathers, breath, and air. How many ambassadors left thinking they'd been heard, when in fact they'd only been measured. How many proposals were accepted because a servant lifted his arm twice instead of once. You begin to see it clearly now. This isn't a bedroom. It's a theater of illusion. And the fan? The quietest weapon in the kingdom. The woman behind the fan looks up and locks eyes with you for a moment. Not hostile. Not friendly. Just clear. Then she whispers, "Don't trust the silence," and resumes her rhythm. Whip whip. Whip whip. Pause. The Pharaoh exhales. And somewhere in the empire, an agreement is already taking shape. Sheets of gold and deceit. By now you think you've seen it all. Dancers who plant dreams, servants who fan in code, bed frames that whisper in 6 tongues. But tonight, as you return to the Pharaoh's bedroom, something stops you cold in the doorway. The bed glows. Not from candlelight. Not from moonlight. From the sheets. They shimmer with a soft, molten gleam, gold-threaded linen, so fine it barely wrinkles, draped across the sleeping platform like a second sun. You step closer and see the weave, so delicate it catches your breath. Each thread is thinner than a reed fiber, yet bound with gold dust so real you can smell it. Not glitter. Not paint. Gold. The bed of a god? Sure. But this? This is also strategy. You remember a line from a scribe's commentary you once read, tucked in the margins of a tax scroll. The golden cloth speaks louder than the scepter. At the time, you thought it was poetic. Now you realize it was literal. The steward notices your awe and smiles faintly. "These sheets are shown," he says. "But only when the Pharaoh wishes someone to see them." You ask, "Someone like a visiting envoy?" He nods. "It's a message," he explains. "Gold on a bed means peace, for now." You frown. "Shouldn't that mean luxury?" "Oh no," he says softly. "Luxury is expected. Gold is different. Gold says, we don't need your alliance. We're sleeping on your bribes." You blink. He lifts the corner of the sheet and lets it fall. It ripples like liquid light. "There's only one set," he adds. "They're never used unless the meeting the next day is delicate." You glance at the schedule scratched in ink near the door. Tomorrow, the envoy from Libya. A man known for excessive gifts. Lavish offers. Coded threats. So tonight? The Pharaoh sleeps under a blanket of sarcasm. And thread count. You sit on the edge of the room and watch the way the light dances across the linen. It's beautiful. But cold. Too perfect. And then the steward says something else. "Did you know?" he murmurs. "Someone was killed over these sheets." You stiffen. "What?" He nods. 2 summers ago. An advisor requested them for his quarters. Said it would impress a foreign guest. You raise your eyebrows. "Impress," he repeats. "Or confuse." Apparently, the guest was tricked into thinking the Pharaoh had approved the treaty. He returned home. With news of peace. Egypt, of course, had made no such promise. And when the Pharaoh found out, the advisor was removed. Violently. Historians still argue over what really happened. Some say it was a misunderstanding. Others say it was a plot. But the golden sheets disappeared for months after that. Some believed they were destroyed. They weren't. They were waiting. Just like now. You notice something strange. The underside of the sheet, barely visible at the corner, has a different color. Darker. Less gold, more bronze. You crouch to see more clearly. There are markings. Symbols. Tiny, almost invisible glyphs woven into the threads on the side that only touches the pharaoh. You ask the steward cautiously, "What do those mean?" He doesn't answer right away. Then, they're reminders. Of what? He doesn't look at you. Of who gave the sheets. And what was promised in return. You stare at the underside again. This isn't a sheet. It's a ledger. You move back to the head of the bed, watching the fabric settle with a whisper. And then you remember something. Years ago, during a dry season, a princess from the north gifted the pharaoh a cloak woven with gold. Weeks later, her city received irrigation help, despite being a minor ally. Coincidence? Unlikely. Now you wonder, did that cloak become a pillowcase? Or part of this very sheet? You imagine Pharaoh lying in silence, wrapped in promises stitched in metal. Dreaming in obligation. A faint noise breaks your thought. A servant enters with gloves, and carefully lifts one edge of the sheet, adjusting it by exactly half a finger's width. You ask why. He shrugs. Too much gold showing means arrogance. Too little means weakness. You almost laugh. Of course. Even the fold must be curated. Because in this room, even the blanket negotiates. The steward walks you to the side alcove, where the other linens are kept, hidden behind carved wooden screens. He shows you a deep blue sheet, thick with silver embroidery. Night of mourning, he says. Then a red one. Announcing power. A plain white one, coarse, stiff. Humility. You raise your eyebrows. Rarely used, he admits. You leave the linen room dazed. Back near the bed, the golden sheet seems to pulse softly, as if breathing with the chamber itself. And you wonder, how many emissaries have misread this sign? How many miscalculations were made because someone mistook comfort for surrender? How many alliances began, or ended, beneath these shimmering folds? You step toward the doorway, pausing for one last look. The pharaoh stirs. Rolls over. His hand touches the sheet and lingers there. Not caressing. Feeling. Reading. And you understand. Tonight, even as he sleeps, he knows what's at stake. And if he wakes tomorrow wrapped in gold? Someone somewhere is about to lose a little leverage. The silence before storms. You walk into the pharaoh's bedroom and know immediately, something's different. There is no scent in the air. No movement. No rhythm from fans. No soft shuffle of feet. No rustle of linen. Not even the pop of incense embers. Silence. And not the usual, curated hush you've grown used to in this place. The gentle quiet of well-managed sleep. No. This is the kind of silence that settles over everything like dust before lightning strikes. You pause in the doorway. A servant sees you and raises a single finger to his lips, not in greeting, but in warning. You step forward carefully. The room has been emptied. No dancers. No fan-bearer. No musicians, no whispering scribes. No watchful ministers tucked behind curtains. Just the pharaoh. Asleep. And alone. You whisper to the servant at the door. What happened? He leans in. A message arrived. Just after sunset. You wait. From the border, he adds. Northern garrisons. Still he doesn't say it. But you know. It was not good news. Pharaoh sleeps on his side, curled in a way you've never seen before. One hand under his cheek. The other resting on the bed frame near the carved glyph for listen. You can't help but wonder if it's intentional. The golden sheets are gone. So are the lavender-scented linens, the cooling jars, even the blue stones that usually mark the lunar phase. Tonight the room is stripped bare. The message is clear. No distractions. No comfort. This is the night before something changes. You move toward the back alcove, where a writing desk usually overflows with scrolls. It's clean now, save for one item. A single tablet. Unfired clay. No markings yet. But the reed pen is waiting. In this room, that's the equivalent of a loaded weapon. You sit in the far corner, in the shadows, trying not to shift too much on the stone bench. Because tonight, even your breath feels too loud. You think about the patterns of the past few weeks. Meetings cut short, envoys sent home early, silence at dinners. The signs have been there. And now, tonight, this stillness. This tension. This absolute, sacred quiet. There's a story some servants tell in whispers, about the night before Nubia. How the Pharaoh once slept in complete silence, without servants or songs, for a full day and night. When he awoke, he gave no orders. He simply walked to the war chamber and pointed to a single name on a list. That man never returned. The battle began the next morning. Historians still debate whether that moment was planned in advance or truly sparked in dream. Whether the silence was tactical or instinctual. But the outcome was the same. Storm. A gust of wind rattles the shutters. Not loudly. Just enough. A dry, papery sound. The Pharaoh does not stir. But one eye flutters. Briefly. Then stillness returns. You rise slowly and move to the corner shelf near the bed. The items there are curated, objects meant to guide the Pharaoh's thoughts. Tonight, only one remains. A tiny carved lion. Barely the size of your palm. Made of lapis and onyx, with gold-flecked eyes. You pick it up gently. On the base, a word carved so small you almost miss it. Restraint. You exhale. Even the lion hesitates. Behind the main curtain, you hear the sound of someone clearing their throat, quiet, but deliberate. The high priest enters. He doesn't speak to you. He walks to the foot of the bed and kneels. No words. No chants. Just presence. His hands rest on his knees, eyes closed. A second later, the general enters. He does the same. And then another. Until 6 men form a semicircle around the Pharaoh's bed, kneeling in silence. You back away. There's nothing for you here. Only watching. Only waiting. Because this is not the night of action. This is the night before. The silence before. And everyone here knows better than to break it. You remember an old phrase etched into the entryway of the Southern Archive. Before the Nile swells, the fish sleep. Maybe the empire works the same way. Maybe war begins not with a horn, but with a hush. Maybe it's not the roar of an army that signals change, but the lack of a lullaby. The torches burn lower. One by one, the kneeling men rise and exit. No instructions were given. But the message was received. The Pharaoh has not moved. But his decision? It's coming. And it will not be small. You stand in the doorway now, looking back one last time. The room has swallowed all sound, all light, all comfort. And tomorrow? The sound will return. But not the same. It will be the clash of sandals on stone, the thud of spears meeting the dust, the rustle of banners lifted toward uncertain skies. And all of it will have begun. Here. In silence. Perfume as passport. The chamber is quiet again, but this time, not because of dread. Tonight, something else lingers in the air. A smell. Not overwhelming. Not heavy. Just unfamiliar. You breathe it in before you see the source. It's warm, spicy, floral. Faintly sweet. Like crushed blossoms in wine, with a sharp undercurrent of something medicinal. It clings to the edges of the room, wrapping around curtains, weaving between stone and shadow. It smells foreign. And that, in this palace, is reason enough to be suspicious. You follow the scent toward the side chamber, where a line of clay jars sits on a shelf. Most are labeled with the familiar inked glyphs for lavender, myrrh, blue lotus, cinnamon. But one is different. No label. Just a cord tied around the neck. A knotted string. Thick. Dyed a faded crimson. You reach for it, and immediately a voice cuts the air. Don't open that. You freeze. It's the perfume steward. He steps into the room like a ghost materializing from the incense haze. His eyes are fixed on the jar. Not angry. Just cautious. That one, he says softly, has its own story. He takes it from your hand and places it gently back on the shelf, away from the others. Then, almost reluctantly, he tells you. It was used once. By a guest. You wait. A woman. Your brow furrows. An envoy? He shakes his head. A spy. The story spills out like smoke. Years ago, no one agrees how many, a foreign court sent a woman to Thebes. Not as an assassin. Not as a thief. As a guest. She arrived with no weapons. No scrolls. Just a tiny vial of perfume. No one stopped her. No one questioned the scent. And because of that, she passed through every gate. She wore it like a shield. The steward murmurs. Every servant assumed she was permitted. Every guard thought someone else had approved her. You nod slowly, beginning to see it. She smelled like the Pharaoh's favorite blend. He nods. Not similar, he says. Exact. That scent hadn't been used in over a year. The reserves were locked. But somehow she had it. A stolen recipe? A bribed steward? A gift misused? They never found out. She walked into the palace. Into the private gardens. Into the Hall of Maps. She even reached the royal library. And when she was finally questioned, days later, it was by accident. A steward noticed the perfume's scent had changed slightly. A second note had been added. Bitter almond. And in this world, that only means one thing. Poison. Historians still argue whether she succeeded in her mission. The records are careful. The scrolls vague. But within days, 3 advisors were dismissed. One disappeared entirely. The perfume? Sealed in this jar. Never burned again. Never replicated. Too dangerous. Too persuasive. You glance toward the Pharaoh's bed. The linens tonight are pale, unadorned. The room smells of nothing but faint old incense and limestone. But in the corridor beyond, a guest is arriving. A woman. Not a spy this time. a diplomat. From a kingdom far to the east. She arrives carrying no scrolls. Just a vial. You watch from behind the curtain as she steps into the chamber. The moment her foot touches the mosaic floor, heads turn. Eyes widen. The air shifts. Someone behind you inhales sharply. The steward whispers, "It's that blend." Your pulse quickens. "She's using that blend?" He nods. "She shouldn't have it." You glance at him. "Should we stop her?" He doesn't answer right away. Then, "No. Not yet. Let's see what she wants first." She walks to the center of the room and bows. Not deeply. Not nervously. She's calm. And behind her, the scent trails like a signature. You realize now, this is her passport. Her entry key. Her opening move. She hasn't said a word. But already, she's made an offer. And a threat. The Pharaoh hasn't spoken either. He's seated upright tonight. Alert. Watching. He sniffs once. Raises an eyebrow. Then smiles. Just slightly. And the steward leans toward you and murmurs. He remembers. You shiver. Because now you do too. The diplomat speaks at last. Her voice is low, musical. The language is unfamiliar, but the tone is clear. Respect. Challenge. Curiosity. She gestures once, and a servant steps forward with a second jar, twin to the one on the shelf. Unlabeled. Knotted in crimson. The room holds its breath. Pharaoh doesn't reach for it. Instead, he stands, walks forward, and, for the first time in weeks, inhales deeply. Silence. Then, "Let her pass." The guards step aside. The woman enters the inner chamber. And the steward turns to you and whispers, "She just walked through 7 layers of protocol." You nod. "And all she used," you say, "was scent." In this palace, words are weighed. Gifts are catalogued. But fragrance? Fragrance is memory. Fragrance is access. Fragrance, it turns out, is currency. And sometimes, on rare, dangerous nights, perfume is the only passport you need. The throne beside the bed. The chamber is lit only by the soft orange pulse of a brazier in the corner, throwing warm shadows up the walls like slow-moving thoughts. You enter quietly, but the room seems to have already noticed you. The Pharaoh is asleep. But you're not here for him tonight. You're here for what's next to him. At the foot of the bed, just to the right of the dais, sits a small, low throne, less ornate than his ceremonial seat, but no less deliberate. You've seen it before in the corner of your eye, tucked just outside the spotlight of gold linens and incense trails. Tonight, it takes center stage. And you finally understand why. It's carved from dark sycamore wood, the kind that gleams like oil under firelight. The arms are slightly curved, worn smooth by use. There's no gold inlay, no lapis, no lion heads, no grandeur. But the cushion? That's new. Fresh linen. Thick. Simple. Inviting. You sit. It creaks faintly beneath your weight, but otherwise it accepts you like an old habit. And just like that, you see what the throne really is. It's not for rulership. It's for listening. This is where decisions are made before they're formal. Where the Pharaoh sits with one advisor at a time. No scrolls. No witnesses. No scribes to polish the words for posterity. Just words. Just breath. Just proximity. Here, on this modest seat, ministers lean forward to whisper about borders. Priests murmur omens they don't want recorded. Generals confess doubts they'd never say aloud in a hall of columns. And sometimes, when no one else is present, the Pharaoh talks to the wall, or to the fan, or to the darkness. This is the seat of quiet power. You look down and notice faint scratches on the armrest, places where fingers once pressed too hard. Someone gripped this chair in stress, in fear, in conviction. You run your hand along the groove. There's a rhythm to it, almost like the tapping of anxious nails. You wonder what was decided here. How many wars began just inches from the Pharaoh's sleeping breath? How many truces were born from a tired exhale? How many secrets passed from one person to another while the empire dozed? There's a small notch in the backrest, a mark no taller than your fingernail. You lean closer. It's not damage. It's a carving. A name. You trace it softly. Not the Pharaoh's. An advisor? A queen? A brother? No one ever talks about who gets to sit in this seat. Only that it exists. Only that it's always there. Even when the Pharaoh travels, this throne travels too. Folded. Wrapped. Reassembled beside every bed, in every temple chamber, every summer retreat, every military tent. Because power doesn't sleep. It waits beside the one who does. You shift slightly and realize how close the chair is to the bed. You could speak without raising your voice. You could say something and no one else would hear it. Not even the guards outside. Not even the scribes in the next room. Just you and the one who dreams. Some believe the throne is a safeguard, a seat for the last whisper before sleep. Others think it's a test. Whoever sits here must say exactly the right thing, or nothing at all. The wrong word at the wrong moment could wake the Pharaoh into a different man. The kind of man who sends messengers. Or armies. You glance to your left and notice the edge of a scroll peeking out from beneath the bed. It's unrolled just enough to show a line of text. Not instructions. Not orders. Just one sentence. The ear that hears besides sleep is closest to truth. You breathe that in. And feel the weight of it. Here, in this quiet corner of power, a single sentence can bypass every protocol. A whisper here is louder than 1,000 proclamations shouted from balconies. You rise slowly from the throne, heart steady. You leave the seat exactly as you found it. Linen smooth. Arms unmarked. As if no one had been there at all. Because that's the nature of this place. Nothing here is written. But everything here is remembered. As you exit the chamber, you glance back one last time. The Pharaoh shifts in his sleep. A breeze stirs the curtain. And the little throne sits in the dark, empty, waiting. Not for ceremony. Not for applause. But for the next truth too powerful to say anywhere else. Final 300 words, the close. The torches in the hall burn lower now. The stone beneath your feet cools as night deepens. The palace is still, as if even the columns are holding their breath. And inside the Pharaoh's bedroom, behind layers of silk, cedar, and silence, a man dreams beneath linens weighted with politics. You've seen the dancers, the fans, the codes and threads. You've smelled the diplomacy. Heard the decisions carved in breathless whispers. This place, this chamber, is not just a room. It's a brain. A temple. A storm cloud that holds the shape of an empire. And now? It quiets. The shadows lengthen. The temperature softens, cooled by jars and intention. The scent fades, replaced by sleep. And the dreams, Those carefully planted seeds of movement, power, patience, they stir in the dark, drifting like pollen across the Pharaoh's mind. There will be no speeches tonight. No drums. No scribes scratching ink into the future. Only the soft rhythm of breath. The steady thrum of rest. And beneath it all, the memory of everything you've seen. The golden sheets that signaled disdain. The dancers who whispered victories. The bugs that nearly ruined a treaty. The perfume that crossed 7 barriers. The throne beside the bed, where war and peace are decided. You let your eyes close. And in the quiet, the stories fold inward like petals in the heat. A kingdom sleeps. So can you. So should you. Sure. It's all done now. End of script. Sweet dreams.